Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. My name is Lakhani from Islamic Society of Augusta. We would like to thank the candidates, Mr. John Barrow and Mr. Rick Allen, and all the audience. Thank you for giving us your time. Islamic Society has been in Augusta for almost 40 years, and we have grown from a very small community to over 1,000 people in congregation. We have about 200 children at the Sunday school at the center, and it's a very fast-growing community. And most of the people know that Muslim community in Augusta is very educated and quite successful, and we have been very, asset to the community and to the country. Muslims are U.S. citizens, and they contribute quite a bit to the progress of the country. We are on this side of the Atlantic. We are not on the other side. And again, thank you again for everybody coming here. And inshallah, Dr. Father will continue. Thank you again.
Thank you, Brother Lakhani. We'll start with the Pledge of the Allegiance. It will be read by one of our youth, the president of the youth group of the Islamic Society of Augusta. His name is Zachariah Johnson.
Okay, please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Please be seated.
Now I'll ask the Imam of the Islamic Society of Augusta, Jamal Dawoodi, to give the invocation.
Sirs, let's bow our head, turn to our Creator, asking for help today. In the name of God, the Creator, most gracious, most merciful, praise be to God, the cherisher and sustainer of the world, most gracious, most merciful, possessor of the day of judgment. You alone we do worship, and your aid alone we seek. Guide us through the straight path, the path of on whom you have bestowed your grace, those whose portion is not your wrath, and who do not go astray. We ask you, our Creator, today to bless our event with all success, to bless our candidates by opening their minds, eyes, and hearts to serve this state and this nation to the best of what they should be, to put people's need in their top priorities, regardless of their political affiliation. Our Creator, may your graciousness bless our beautiful state of Georgia, and may your graciousness bless our beautiful United States of America. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Imam Jamal. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for this debate, Mr. Steve Crawford. He is the publisher of the Columbia County News Times. Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Dr. Fadl, and thanks everyone again for showing up this afternoon. I myself am missing the Georgia football game, and missing the kickoff of my son's football game.
You got my line there.
We've all made sacrifices, but it's a worthy sacrifice to be here because this is an important event, and we want to hear the thoughts and words from these candidates. I'll quickly go over how this is going to work, the rules of the event. Each candidate will have a few minutes, about 3 minutes, to give an opening statement, after which we have 4 questions that have already been provided to the candidates ahead of time, so they should be prepared to answer these. After those 4 questions are answered, they will be answering them alternatively. There was a coin flipped. Mr. Allen won the toss. He'll be proceeding first, and we will alternate after that. After we complete all those statements, all those questions, we will go to written questions from the audience. Now, there are cards available. If you want to write a question, you may write a question, hold it up. Who's going to be collecting those cards? Okay, just raise your hand, and one of the youth members will collect the card from you, bring it up here, and we'll go through the cards, and we'll get to as many questions as possible before time runs out, because we want to stick to our hour program. Hold up your hand if you want a card, and one will be delivered to you. I know we have some. All right. Each question they'll have 2 minutes to answer. Our timer up front will keep track of the time and hold up a card for them when they are nearing the end of their time period and when they need to stop. If for any reason one of the candidates feels they need to respond to an allegation or claim made by the other candidate, they'll have 1 minute to respond. At the end, they'll have time for another 2 minutes for a closing statement. One thing everyone needs to remember at this point is take a look at your cell phone right now and make sure that it's off. I'm doing that for myself. And one thing for our candidates, I'm hopeful that they will address the questions as asked, and as much as they can, refrain from using it as a jumping off point to go to talking points and avoiding the questions, because these are issues that we all want to hear their thoughts on, and I think everyone would agree to that. So, without further ado, I think it's time to move on to our opening statements, and Mr. Allen is the first, so Mr. Allen, go ahead.
Good. Well, thank you so much. I am overwhelmed by the attendance today. I thank you for that. It is a football Saturday, and I was trying to get a score before I got in here, but I've been over in South Augusta with our veterans talking about their issues, and we had to rush over. So I'm also sorry that I didn't get here a little earlier, because I typically like to visit with everyone before we get started with the discussing the issues. I'm also sorry that Robin's not here. Robin is, as often she has to do, is covering us on another event, but I'll leave you with this, and I'll tell you what one thing is she's going to say. She's going to say, well, y'all know Rick's not perfect, but I've been working on him for 41 years, and I ain't going to stop when he gets to Washington. And I will tell you that she believes that I have the leadership qualities to change the direction of this country. You know, I was born and raised right down the road here, right on Hereford Farm Road, and I learned a lot growing up on that farm. I learned a lot about work ethic, and I learned a lot about leadership. I learned about getting shoulder to shoulder in the field. I learned that you never ask someone to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. In fact, growing up on that farm, in my wildest dreams did I ever believe I'd be before you here today, a farm boy with a construction degree, debating the issues with an Ivy League educated attorney. Now that's America, folks, and I'm proud to be here. You know, there's been a lot of confusion about this debate, and I'm here. And I'm glad to be here. And, well, even I think John's press release did admit that we did request 5 debates right after the primary. We could have eliminated all this confusion if we had scheduled those debates, agreed on the place, and how the debates would occur. So the last 10 days has been, like I said, a lot of confusion. We apologize for that, but it is good to be here. Let me tell you what this election is about. This is a critical election. It's a midterm. And what it's about is the failed policies of this administration over the last 6 years. It's about economy, it's about this economy, and it's about growing this economy, and it's about jobs, and it's about balancing the budget.
All right, Mr. Allen,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you for your remarks.
Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Barrow.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I particularly want to thank the folks who are responsible for putting this on. I know there was a lot of back and forth on whether this was even going to happen, especially you, Steve. Thank you all for making it happen and sticking with it. I want to set the table for our discussion about talking about 3 things that I've accomplished and that I stand for, and then I look forward to your questions. I want to talk about jobs, accessibility, and accountability. On the subject of jobs, I am proud to have played a leading role in bringing 3 of the largest job-creating programs to this district and in the state. That's expanding Plant Vogel down in Burke County, that's deepening the Savannah Harbor, and that's bringing Cyber Command here to Augusta. Each of these projects is bringing thousands of good-paying jobs to this district. On the subject of accessibility, I'm proud of the fact that whenever Congress is in session, I'm down here in the district spending every minute of my free time visiting with folks, whether it's Congress on the corners, town hall meetings, you name it. In fact, everywhere I go, people come to me and say, we've never had a congressman work this hard to spend this much time listening to us and to share our concerns, and I'm proud of that fact. On the subject of accountability, I think Congress ought to be held to the same standards as everybody else. That's why I'm fighting to end congressional perks. Case in point, members of Congress get a very generous taxpayer-subsidized health insurance subsidy. I think it's wrong for Congress to get those when everybody else is losing theirs, because this Congress won't fix what's broke with Obamacare. That's why I give my taxpayer health insurance subsidy back to the government, because I think it's wrong for us to keep ours and everybody else is losing theirs. An even bigger case in point, I don't think Congress should get paid if they don't work. Back during the shutdown last year, my opponent supported the government shutdown. I didn't. But while it was going on, I donated my pay to the Augusta-area project because I think it was wrong for Congress to get paid when they weren't doing their job and not letting anybody else do their job either. I think that's wrong. On a bigger scale, Congress shouldn't get paid if they don't do those basic functions. Adopt a budget. That's something we need to do. And if we don't do it, we ought not to get paid. Now, my opponent is going to try and convince you that he and I are 2 things we're not. He's going to distort my record, and he's going to say as little as possible about his own. But I think it's fair to say that if Rick's elected, he's going to find a good place up there amongst the bitter, partisan, do-nothing culture we already have too much of in Congress. I'm going to continue to be independent and put Georgia over either party. You know I'm going to do that because that's what I've done always. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Sorry. Okay, now we're going to proceed to the questions. One thing I would like to ask you to do from this point on is hold your applause until the end, because that'll give us time for more questions, if you can refrain from applauding the answers. All right. Our first question goes to Mr. Allen first, since he won the coin toss. We need to reduce the budget deficit. Next to government entitlement programs, the defense budget is the 2nd largest portion of discretionary spending. Would you support changing the focus of the military from big, expensive weapon systems to developing new technologies that are less costly and perhaps more effective in the type of wars the U.S. is involved in at present?
Well, I will tell you this. We need to support our military. But I want to share a few more things with you about my opponent, John Barrow. John Barrow has voted 28 times for Obamacare, the most job-killing legislation out there. He voted for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. Since John has been in office, this deficit, and he talks about budgets, this deficit is increased $10 trillion. John has voted for amnesty. He voted for the most expensive stimulus package, which really accomplished nothing and put us almost $1 trillion in debt. He voted for cash for clunkers. The one thing John Barrow has never voted on is a budget. Now, how do you grow the government from $2.3 trillion to $4 trillion? You don't have a budget. And I've seen no work on his behalf to deal with this. Now, as far as our military, it costs around $2 million to put a soldier on the battlefield per year. And we need to support those soldiers. We need to give them the best equipment available. We live in a very dangerous time, and we must deal with our enemies. What I want to do is get our priorities in order in this nation. How do you grow a government from $2.3 trillion to $4 trillion, and you cut our military, and you clog up our economy, and you cost us, jobs? You know, we haven't created jobs in the last 6 years. I have created jobs, I've grown the economy, and I've balanced budgets. Folks, I'm a small businessman. I'm not a career politician. I don't intend to be a career politician. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Is my microphone working? All right, so I'm going to restate the question for Mr. Barrow.
Thank you.
We need to reduce the budget deficit. Next to government entitlement programs, the defense budget is the second largest portion of discretionary spending. Would you support changing the focus of the military from big, expensive weapon systems to developing new technologies that are less costly and perhaps more effective in the types of wars the U.S. is involved in at present?
Thank you, Steve, for restating the question, because at the risk of prejudice in my case, I'm going to answer the question that was asked, but I invite any of y'all who's curious about any of the things that Rick threw onto the table, bring them up there in your portion of the questioning. I'd love to talk about them. On the subject of whether or not we should go for big, expensive weapons or less expensive, more effective things, I want to begin at the outset by saying I agree with the sentiments expressed by the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said the greatest threat to our national security is, in fact, our national debt. Now, I know that rubs some people as counterintuitive, but if you can't pay for your defense, you got no defense. And he was absolutely right about that. In order to address our national debt, it's going to take a bipartisan effort, because nothing less is going to get done. Nothing less is going to change anything. I think we need a bipartisan effort to adopt a balanced budget amendment. I think we need to have a bipartisan approach toward cutting wasteful spending. All of these are things I think we have to do on a bipartisan basis in order to be able to take the pressure off the defense budget and make it possible for successive generations to pay for the defense they're going to need to face the enemies they're going to face in the future. On the specifics of the question, should we go for big, expensive programs or less expensive, more effective ones? I think the question is, at least as far as we're concerned, addressing us, far less a matter of what we ought to do, and it is a question of who we ought to listen to. Because frankly, I don't take my guidance on these matters from politicians who are passing through, who have a partisan agenda, whether they're in the executive or in the legislative branch. I try and take my guidance in these matters from the senior career people in the Defense Department, from the senior military men and women who know best how to adjust what we're doing to respond to the threats of the future. I'm going to continue to do that, not because I think we've got the best ideas, because they have committed their life to it, they have a lifetime of experience in it, and I'm going to be guided by their advice. Besides, what you may think of as being big and expensive can be a whole lot more effective than things that aren't. So we need to respond and listen to the people who know best about it. It's been my policy. It'll continue to be my policy.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow.
Since my name was brought up there, I would like to respond that the only way to supply our military and do what we need to do to fund our military is to grow jobs in this country and grow this economy. We got a war on two fronts, folks. We got a war with the economy and overregulation of this government, this stopping the creation of jobs in this economy. And my opponent knows that, and he's done nothing to stop that. I have seen nothing in a bipartisan effort to do that. And his party has run up a tab that, frankly, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to have a very difficult time paying.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next question goes to Mr. Barrow first. How do you view the U.S. government's surveillance of American citizens without a warrant or a probable cause of criminal activity? What will you do to protect our civil liberties, including our right to privacy?
First off, I think the two most important responsibilities the government has is to protect the citizens, but also to protect their civil liberties. The oldest question among free people is who's going to guard the guardians? The oldest question, and our Constitution has provided an answer for 226 years. Judges should provide the supervision and should be the guardians of the guardians. The Fourth Amendment says no searches of person, papers, or places without a warrant issued upon probable cause. Now, I believe whether it's with respect to ongoing surveillance, when you're listening into conversations or reading things as they're being written, I don't think any of that should happen unless it's done pursuant to a court order that is supervised by a court that is independent, Article III court, that can make sure that the executive is carrying out the search under reasonable conditions and as authorized by court. Likewise, with respect to searches that are made of vast inventories of stuff, whether it's kept by private business for their purposes or kept by anybody else, I don't think you should be able to go back in time and read emails or letters or anything else without a judicial warrant. That is the answer that's been provided by our Constitution. I think it's the best answer we've got in the world, and I'm going to continue to make that my policy.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Mr. Allen, I'll reset the question for you. How do you view the U.S. government's surveillance of American citizens without a warrant or even probable cause of any criminal activity? What will you do to protect our civil liberties, including our right to privacy?
Right now, well, I think I'm totally against what this government's doing right now, and I want to explain how it works. Right now, the paper in your filing cabinet is better protected than the internet. For example, for the IRS to come in and to examine the papers in your file, they have to have a search warrant. And but on the internet, you know, they can hack in there and you know, do not have to have a search warrant. There was legislation written in 1986 under President Reagan. Of course, Vince Dooley was coach of the Georgia Bulldogs then, and nobody had heard of Google or Twitter or Facebook. And that legislation is right now up for review, and there are 270 signatures on that legislation to protect our internet. That you must have a search warrant to hack into your internet. Out of that 270, our own Congressman Tom Price is assigned to it. Lynn Westmoreland is a signature to that. Even John Lewis. It's a bipartisan bill. It's 270 Republicans and 100 Democrats. The one signature on that bill is not supporting that bill is John Barrow. If you elect me to Congress, I'll make sure that bill gets to through the legislature, and I will protect our internet the same way we protect our file cabinet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Barrow, you have a minute to respond.
Well, first off, it doesn't take 270 votes to pass something in the House. It takes 218 votes to pass something in the House. So if it hadn't gone forward in the House, it's for a bunch of other reasons. But I stated my position before. I believe the court should supervise this process. When we were struck by 9/11, we had a judicial oversight process that was antiquated and dated, went back to the 70s. We even had cell phones. I think we've made a lot of progress since then. But I've always insisted, and I always will insist, that it be a judicially supervised process, that the court superintend this process. That's what Article 4 requires. And it may be cumbersome, it may be tough for some, but that's what our Constitution gives us. That's the guard of the guardians that the Constitution gives us, and I'm going to insist on it.
All right, thank you. Our third question goes to Mr. Allen. Healthcare costs continue to spiral. Although millions of Americans have become insured under the Affordable Care Act, it has yet to be completely implemented. Still, several million Americans cannot afford adequate medical care. Instead of continued efforts to repeal the act, why not try to fix its deficiencies and make it better, Mr. Allen?
I will tell you this, if you elect me to the United States Congress, I will work to repeal Obamacare. It's not fixable. And let me tell you why. Right now, there's even debate between mandates, you know, just to take the mandates out of the law. Well, if you take the mandates out of the law, you don't have a law. You know, that debate needs to end. We need to get back to our states and to our local areas and solve this problem between the doctor and the patient. And we don't need bureaucrats in Washington telling us how to deliver health care. Folks, this president said that you can keep your doctor, that you can keep your health insurance, and your premiums are going to be reduced. Well, today, you cannot keep your doctor. Most folks have lost their health insurance, and your premiums are going up. And then what I want to know, when my opponent talks about reducing federal spending, the reason the mandates are in there is because somebody's got to pay for this thing. In other words, he wanted young people who pay less than $300 per year for health care to pay 10 times that to support a health care program that does not work. I was talking to our veterans, and one of them said, you know, the problem we have in the Veterans Administration is going to be the same problem we're going to have with Obamacare. Folks, we can fix this. Tom Price has a health bill that I like. I'll be glad to work with Tom Price and get this fixed so that we can, again, go back to the greatest health system that we enjoyed before the government got involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. All right, Mr. Barrow. Healthcare costs continue to spiral. Although millions of Americans have become insured under the Affordable Care Act, it is yet to be completely implemented. Still, several million Americans cannot afford adequate health care. Instead of continued efforts to repeal the act, why not try to fix its deficiencies and make it better?
First off, I want to thank the questioner, because that's been my policy all along. Not because it's ideal, not because of what I want, because it's the only way we're going to get out of the mess that we're in. First, I'm going to be very clear about something. I voted against Obamacare at every stage of the way, in committee and on the floor of the House. But when Rick tells you that I voted for the thing 28 times, he ain't telling you the whole truth. In fact, the truth is, Congress has had over 50 votes to repeal parts of the bill. Every one of them's been different, and they've all been about different parts. So on the question whether it's fixable in part or in whole, you've already lost that argument. Your own side has made that case. Of the 50 votes we've had, I voted for fully half of them, because I think we ought to get rid of the bad parts and keep the good. For example, I am staunchly opposed to the individual mandate, the employer mandate, the cuts to Medicare, the provision that puts the IRS in charge of deciding whether your insurance is going to measure up and how much it's going to cost, the so-called death panel, and I voted to repeal those on every single occasion. But unlike Rick, I don't think we should go back to the days when we discriminate against folks on the basis of pre-existing conditions. I'm a cancer survivor. Maybe there are a few in here. I don't think the millions of cancer survivors in this country should go back to the days when they can get kicked off their insurance coverage even when they beat the cancer. That ain't right. Even a bunch of Republicans like Governor Romney thinks we ought to preserve those parts of the bill, and that's going to continue to be my policy. I will finish.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure very, very plain. I do support a repeal of the bill, so long as we replace it with something that preserves those protections that the vast majority of Americans say we want. If we can get that and a chance to vote on that, I will vote for it. I've said that from the very beginning. That's been my policy all along.
Yeah, I'd like to address one thing there as far as what our congressman wants in a bill, a health care bill. And I agree, there are a lot of ways. There's a good example here on how you take care of folks in health care. We have it right here in Christ Community Health Services. They take good care of folks. They do it for a lot less money than the government's doing it. And that's the answer to health care in our communities, folks. That's what I'm for, and I'm for our community. I am sick and tired of Washington and this double talk that I hear. And, Washington's going to tell us what's best for us. Our communities know how to fix our problems. We can fix our problems if we can get Washington out of the way. Now, what I want to know from Mr. Barrow is how is he going to balance the budget and pay for health care?
Since I've been
It will not happen, John. You're going to break the government. You're going to break the country.
Since I have been asked to respond, at least in part, let me point out that Christ Community Health is getting a lot of money from Obamacare. It's getting a lot of support from programs that are in there that have some broad basis of bipartisan support in it. Money for neighborhood health centers where folks pay on a sliding scale basis. This is building on Peach Care. This is building on the notion that you don't go from being totally dependent on the government for all of your health care expenses to being totally independent as soon as you cross an income threshold. Peach Care is based on that, and that has the support of Georgia politicians in Atlanta. So does a sliding scale basis in the neighborhood health centers like Christ Community Health. These are the examples of the things that if we did what Mr. Allen said he's going to do, we lose that. Now, those are things we've got, and I think we need to build on those, and I'm committed to doing just that.
Thank you. I think if you have any more thoughts on that, you can address it in your closing remarks.
Okay.
All right. Our next question goes to Mr. Barrow. Do you believe man-made greenhouse gas emissions are a major source of climate change? If not, why? If yes, what government measures do you support to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
First off, I think both parties are wrong in using evidence of weather as evidence in support of their claims about climate. There's a big difference between weather and climate. I think Democrats are wrong when they point to nasty weather and say that's evidence of climate change. And Republicans are wrong when they point to nice spells of weather and say that's evidence there's no climate change. I have to accept the consensus view of the community, of the scientific community, that there is climate change and that man-made greenhouse gas emissions are a part of it. Where I disagree with this president and with folks on the Democratic side of the aisle is with respect to the policies that will effectively address it. They are committed to some idea that if we just make business as usual more expensive with a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system, that somehow or another that's going to lead to business as unusual. Well, I know better than that. If you're talking about trying to create new sources of energy that are as cheap and abundant as dirty source of energy, but clean, it's going to take a program of research and development and deployment that vastly outstrips anything you can get from behavioral economics and little nudges here and there by driving up the cost of dirty energy and subsidizing the clean stuff that's around. It's going to take something on the order of the Manhattan Project. It's going to take something on the order of the Apollo program. It literally is going to take that degree of research, development, and deployment, and that's what I support. Another federal policy that does make a contribution, whatever your opinions are on this, if you think carbon dioxide is a pollutant, and I don't think it's what they had in mind back in the Clean Air Act of 1970, but if you think it is a pollutant, you got to support nuclear energy. I've been a big proponent of nuclear energy, and I've provided some of the bipartisan votes necessary to pass the law that we literally had to enact in order to be able to build Plant Vogtle, the first nuclear power plants in this country in 30 years. It took a bipartisan act of Congress to do it because they didn't have the votes on their side of the aisle to do it, but I led the way to do that because whatever you think about nuclear, it's abundant, it's clean, and it's safe, and it's a reliable source of baseload energy. That's the kind of thing we can do. We have done it in the past. We can do it in the future, and I support that.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Mr. Allen, do you believe man-made greenhouse gas emissions are a major source of climate change? If not, why? If yes, what government measures do you support to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
The answer is no. And I will agree with Mr. Barrow on one thing. I would have voted for the expansion of Plant Vogtle. Yes, nuclear energy is one alternative for the future, and we need to do everything we can to build those plants to supply the electricity we need. Now, one reason we need Plant Vogtle is because John Barrow and his party and the EPA have basically shut down the coal-fired power plants in the state of Georgia. Georgia Power is closing those plants. And the reason they're closing those plants is they can't meet the emissions required by the overreach of the EPA. Now, that's costing jobs. Now, hopefully some of those jobs will move to Plant Vogtle. But the bottom line is this, folks. This president, his administration, and John Barrow's party are against fossil fuels. They don't like fossil fuel. All they want is sustainable fuel. If they had anything in common with fossil fuel, we would have a XL pipeline under construction right now. We would be and could be energy independent in North America. It's teed up for us. Why aren't we doing those things? And it's because it's politics as usual in Washington. Folks, this is all about the economy, and it's all about jobs. John Barrow and his friends have their foot on the brake and their foot on the accelerator at the same time. This economy is ready to grow. I'm ready to get Washington out of the way, and we can grow jobs and get our folks back to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
May I, since I was, I want to make sure everybody understands, I'm not in the crowd that Rick's talking about. I support the Keystone Pipeline. I forced the House to take a vote on it. I debated against folks on the Democratic side of the aisle because I think they're just as wrong as they can be on this. They somehow seem to think that we can deny ourselves access to this new source of traditional energy that somehow will spare the world the consequences. They're wrong. I also think the Democrats are wrong when they think this that they can just create a new supply of clean source of energy by simply increasing the demand for it. I agree that if you raise the price of business as usual, if you slap a carbon tax on fossil fuels or impose some cap and trade system on there, you'll create a demand for something new, but you ain't gonna create a supply of anything new. This is gonna require a breakthrough for the benefit of our children and grandchildren. It's gonna take that long to plan. And we can do it because the breakthroughs we've achieved in oil production and natural gas in this country are a direct result of that kind of research and development and deployment. Fracking, these things have happened because the government and the private sector have worked together to create new ways of getting at traditional sources of energy. I support that. Nobody knows that's been going on for 30 years. That's what we need to start to do now if we're going to create new sources of energy for our kids that are just as abundant, just as reliable as we got now, and just as cheap, but clean.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. All right, we're going to go to some additional questions we have here. The first one, Mr. Allen. The unresolved Israel-Palestine issue is a major tool used by radical groups to recruit Muslims against the West. The 1967 borders is a stated position of the U.S. and for the withdrawal of Israel. Do you agree with the two-state solution? And what would you recommend for the U.S. to resolve the conflict?
Well, the problem there is Hamas and in their region. I mean, I think the Palestine people actually want peace, but for whatever reason, they cannot deal with this radical element over there. You know, what I want to do is I want to do whatever we have to do to protect Israel. And we don't need any kind of an agreement that allows Israel to be at risk. You know, I agree with Genesis 12. You know, you bless Israel, God will bless us. Thank you very much.
Mr. Barrow, would you like me to restate the question?
Please, yeah, just for the benefit of all.
The unresolved Israel-Palestine issue is a major tool used by radical groups to recruit Muslims to act against the West. Withdrawal of Israel to the 1967 borders is the stated position of the United States. Do you agree with the two-state solution, and what would you recommend the U.S. government do to help resolve the conflict?
I do agree with this two-state solution. I do think that is the ultimate resolution of the issue, and I think the United States policy ought to be as patient as it takes to make sure that we get an honest negotiating partner with Israel that's willing to negotiate on those terms. Here's my policy toward Israel. It's very simple. I'm committed to their physical security and their political independence. They are our most valued allies because they share our values more than anybody else outside this country in the world. And I'm committed to their physical safety, physical security, and their political independence. Now, allies aren't necessarily going to do what you want them to do. It's better to have allies and not need them than to need allies and not have them. I'm committed to Israel's defense. I have voted for the funds to provide the construction of the Iron Dome project, which has made it possible for them to defend civilians with missiles, whereas their adversaries are defending missiles with civilians. I'm committed to Israel's defense. It's a bipartisan policy, one of the things that brings us together. And I celebrate that fact. It took a hard-drinking, cussing Baptist like Harry Truman to birth that country. It took a disciple of Christ like Lyndon Johnson to see them through their darkest chapter in the '67 war. It took a somewhat challenged Quaker, Richard Nixon, to stand by when their next darkest hour in '73. That's a bipartisan policy that brings most folks in Washington together. And I celebrate that fact. And that's going to be my policy. I'm going to continue to work together with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make sure that Israel is secure. The best solution in the long run is an honest partner on the other side of the table to negotiate the outline of an acceptable two-state solution.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Okay, the next question. This is a question about bipartisanship for Mr. Allen. Well, actually, you, Mr. Barrow, first. How do we get the parties to work together? Compromise has gone away. What would you do if you were elected to get the parties to work together?
Well, first off, you need to understand the nature of the problem, why it is so difficult for the parties to get together. And the underlying reason for that is we've rigged the political process so much that the overwhelming majority in both caucuses, the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus, are so partisan that the vast majority of members of Congress can't even agree on what the problem is, much less the solution. And we don't have our fair share of seats at the table. Those of us who are moderates and centrists, like in this room, we don't have our fair share of seats at the table because too many of the seats are taken up by folks who are elected in primary elections by a very small number of partisan voters. That needs to change. Until we reform that process, and I'm at work in doing that, by the way. I'm taking a leading role in trying to reform that process. Until that happens, we have to make do with leverage, what we lack in votes. I'm working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in a group called the No Labels Problem Solvers Caucus. It consists of folks on both sides of the aisle who sit down and talk to each other, because while we don't agree on a lot of stuff, the one thing you agree on is that the leadership on both sides are either products of this hyper-partisanship or they're prisoners of it. And as a result, the majority in the House, it does exist to do lots of things, is not allowed to vote on stuff. Unless you can pass on just one side, it's not going to be allowed to see the light of day. That guarantees that anything coming out of the House is going to be as partisan as hell. Anything that comes out that will get through the Senate is going to have to be bipartisan, as you know what. And as a result, nothing can get done. Those of us in the Problem Solvers Coalition are trying to work together to share our concerns about this. And we developed an agenda, and I encourage you all to look at it. Go Google Problem Solvers and look at our legislative agenda. It's an example of the kind of stuff that could pass if only our leadership would allow us to vote on things, because there's a bipartisan majority in this House to do stuff despite how partisan the place is.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. All right, Mr. Allen, same question. How do we get the parties to work together? The compromise seems to have gone away. What would you do personally, if elected, to get the parties to work together?
Well, we get this question all the time in the district, and the problem with bipartisanship in the United States Congress is Harry Reid. There are over 372 bills sitting on Harry Reid's desk that the House has agreed to, and he will not let his people vote in the Senate because they'll vote with us in the House. And he does not want that legislation to go through. That's the problem with bipartisanship. Now, let me tell you a little background on John Barrow. When, in 2006, when the Democrats took over the House, John Barrow voted for Nancy Pelosi, the most partisan individual I have ever met in my life. Twice. He voted for her in 2006, he voted for her in 2008. If John Barrow had any influence over any of the members of his party, the Democratic Party, if he'd have gotten 3 or 4 votes, we would not have to be dealing with Obamacare right now. The way you build consensus is through influence. I'm telling you, John Barrow has no influence in the United States Congress to get anything done, much less a bipartisan effort. I mean, why couldn't you find, John, several of your Democratic colleagues to vote against Obamacare if you felt so strongly about it?
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Barrow, do you feel like you need to respond to that?
34 Democrats did vote against it, and I was one of them. Yeah, it's true that Nancy got more votes than she needed. Those of us who were exercising restraining influence on her did not have as much influence then. But I challenge you to look at the kind of stuff we did when Blue Dogs were the majority makers in the Congress. We passed health care reform that people liked. Anybody remember S-chip reform? It expanded peach care and programs like that. We passed a farm bill over George Bush's veto twice. We did some things that actually were positive. It made it possible for folks to run on the record of the Congress rather than away from it. That's the last time that's happened. Then you got a whole bunch of other folks in there that all went down the toilet. Look, I've been able to get things done, not by insisting on taking credit for it, but by working with folks on the other side of the aisle, on both sides of the aisle, on all sides of an issue to get things done. That's how we got the first increase in the mileage reimbursement for disabled veterans in this country in a bipartisan fashion. That's how we ended DOD furloughs driven by sequester last year. That's how we saved the ROTC program at GRU. That's how we got a spectrum auction bill passed that I wrote with colleagues and working with folks in the industry that's bringing $30 billion in revenues and creating jobs at the same time. That's how we reformed the entire way in which we're spending our agricultural research money in this country, reforming along the lines of the NIH in ways that are going to make me more productive. That was done in the first farm bill. These are all things I've been able to do working with my colleagues. We got a VA health clinic in Statesboro for the first time. We're expanding Plant Vogel because of a bipartisan vote that I helped provide. And we're deepening the port because of the changes we made and the law that made it possible for that to happen. And that, too, was done in a bipartisan fashion. I share Mr. Allen's frustration what's going on, but you got to work with folks on both sides of the aisle, and fixing the blame is not going to fix the problem.
Thank you. Hold your applause, please. Hold your applause. Okay. Our next question is about U.S. immigration policy. Okay, U.S. immigration policy seems to be focused on hunting undocumented workers and deporting them. What should be done to regulate and prosecute companies which exploit undocumented workers? And should the U.S. seek a non-punitive pathway for citizenship for the millions of undocumented workers who are already here? I think that's Mr. Allen's question.
Okay. Well, as I said, I'm in a small business. And I'm going to tell you, the most frustrating thing we've ever tried to deal with is E-Verify. I mean, because, you know, you have to be careful because you can then get a lawsuit for discrimination. And so it's quite a burden on our small businesses, by the way. You know, yes, you know, businesses do not need to be hiring illegal immigrants. I agree with that 100%. But guess what? The business community can't deal with this until we close our border. And the way we close our border is we cut off all economic aid to Mexico until they cooperate with us to close that border. And when they cooperate with us, we can close the border. Now, when we close the border, I've been in Honduras on a mission trip. I was down there, met a great guy, spoke great English, and he really helped us. We were pouring concrete floors in houses down there. He had a beautiful home down there. He said he'd worked in this country for 20 years. He sent every nickel he made back home. And he said he had no intention of living in this country because he said, I can live like a king down here, but in America, you know, I couldn't do it. We closed that border. All those folks who are here illegally are going back home. You know, the other problem is human trafficking. It's the $3 billion a year industry. We've got to stop that. But we got to close that border. Once we close that border, then we're going to have a labor problem in this country. And then we're going to have a guest worker program of something so business will have adequate labor and the economy can grow.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Barrow, U.S. immigration policy seems to be focused on hunting and deporting undocumented workers. What should be done to regulate and prosecute companies which exploit undocumented workers? And should the U.S. seek a non-punitive pathway to citizenship for the millions of undocumented workers who are already here?
Well, first off, while I certainly think we need to hold our neighbors accountable for not doing their job, I think it's unrealistic and unpatriotic for us to expect Mexico to keep folks out of our country. That's something we should be doing ourselves, and we should be able to do that on our side of the border. My policy on illegal immigration has been the same all along. We need to secure the border. We need to secure the jobs. We need to secure the benefits. By securing the border, I mean investing the amount of money that's really necessary in people and in things, infrastructure, that can actually keep people moving across the border in massive numbers. You know, if you eliminate the opportunity to enter if you close the border, you eliminate the opportunity to commit the crime of entering this country illegally. And I also think we need E-Verify. It ought not to be optional, it ought to be mandatory for everybody, because that's the only way we're going to secure the jobs. And if you secure the jobs in this country, you've eliminated the motive for someone to commit the crime of entering this country illegally. And my daddy taught me a long time ago, if you eliminate the motive for the crime and the opportunity to commit the crime, you've done a pretty good job of crime control as far as the crime is concerned. That's what we need to do. Now, just a few weeks ago, the House voted on a bill that was actually going to make things worse. They did it for politics. They voted on a bill that was going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, not securing the border, but building dormitories in this country to accommodate the new influx of folks who are entering this country as a result of the failed policies of this and prior administrations to secure our border. My opponent criticized me for voting against that bill. I voted against it because it was going to make the situation worse. Nothing less than a full-scale effort to secure our borders is going to stop folks from coming into this country illegally, and nothing less than securing our jobs with E-Verify, mandatory for everybody, is going to eliminate the motive for them to commit this crime. That's been my policy, and that's the reason why an outfit called Numbers USA has named me as one of the top 10 members of the House in dealing effectively with the illegal immigration problem in this country. I'm proud of that designation.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Mr. Allen, do you want to take a
Yes,
minute?
I'd like to respond. I want to know, have y'all ever heard of an illegal Canadian in the country? I mean, obviously, we have great cooperation with Canada in dealing with that northern border. And of course, they have a great economy up there, and I understand the problem down here. But that bill in the House, John, was to deal with the number of young people who have come to this country that this government has now dispersed. I think several hundred or maybe even 1,000 have ended up in Georgia. And what's happening is these young people are then being paid by the government to be taken care of by a family, and then they're to be processed. What our side did was trying to get those folks processed in a manner quick enough to get them back home with their parents where they belong, and not having been dealt the blow they've been dealt with by some human trafficking organization. Like I said, folks, this is a $3 billion a year industry. And I don't see our government doing anything about that. I haven't heard anybody talk about that. It must be stopped. We can stop it, but we're going to have the cooperation of Mexico, and somehow we've got to get their attention.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. One more minute? Okay.
First off, the idea that we ought to process these folks, spend hundreds of millions of dollars building dormitories to process them here in this country. That's the bill that he supported and criticized me for voting against. Well, down in Appling County, they're going to have to deal with a lot of these folks who will be processed on a long-term basis in our district. And it's not fair to them, it's not fair to the school system, and it's not fair to the rest of us. We need to secure the border and secure the jobs. That's what we need to do. Now, I think Senator Coburn had a better idea. Rather than spending $200 million on dormitories and $40 million in tribute money to the countries that aren't doing our work for us, I think we ought to give them all a first-class ticket home and a companion on the way back. It would be cheaper and more effective, and it would send the message that the crime of coming into this country doesn't pay. It's not harmful, it's not mean, it's rational. It makes more sense than spending hundreds of millions of dollars basically making the symptoms of the problem the new normal. I don't support that at all.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to go to closing remarks. So this is the last question from the audience. The American Muslim community is worried about their rights and their safety given the rising Islamophobia in the USA. How are you going to contribute to educating your colleagues in Congress to understand that not all Muslims are terrorists? Mr. Barrow.
I think I do it by example, by treating every law-abiding citizen alike. That's what the framers intended. That's what we should do. As Christians, as Jews, as Protestants, Gentiles, Catholics, that's what we should do, and that's what I do. I also believe in the Constitution. I think it applies to everybody. I don't think it applies to just some folks. When folks mix their politics up with their religion, I think we need to respect folks who are mixing it up. You need to recognize that respect for religion doesn't mean we suspend our laws either. I think we ought to treat everybody with respect. And I think, frankly, the manner in which we came here today reflects a concern that some folks have about the way in which folks are treated in this country. I wanted to respond to the opportunity to debate no matter who was extending the invitation, and I did. And I'll continue to do so, because I think it's important for everybody to know that this community, it takes all kinds to make a community, just like it takes all kinds to make a world. It takes all kinds to make a United States of America, as long as you're committed to the Constitution and the things that it stands for. Freedom of religion, freedom to practice your own religion. As long as that's your policy, you're going to find a welcome place in this country, and I'm going to be a welcome partner with you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Mr. Allen, the American Muslim community is worried about their rights and safety given the rising Islamophobia in the USA. How are you going to contribute to educating your colleagues in Congress to understand that not all Muslims are terrorists?
Well, I agree with John Barrow. We need to have, you need to be welcomed, particularly at a debate of this magnitude, because the facts need to be addressed. Now, the question was as far as where we would meet today. Again, I want to thank Columbia County for providing this facility. You know, I think that John Barrow should be asked the question is why he insisted that the debate be in the Islamic Center. Now, the idea behind this is we want to make everybody feel welcome at every facility, okay? Now, I detest what is going on in the Middle East, and I know it turns your stomach too. And it must be stopped. And what I want from everyone who's a citizen of this country to speak out and speak out horribly against it. That's what I want to see from every religion. You know, we must stop this radicalism. And I believe that our country is doing everything we can to stop it. But we need everybody's help to stop it. It must be condemned, it must be stopped, and I would ask all of us to come together as people, citizens of this country, and agree on that. And I think we'll be able to stop it. Thank you.
Steve, I need to respond to the statement of fact that's simply not true. I did not insist that the debate be held anywhere. I accepted an invitation to a debate that had been extended honorably by respected members of our community. That invitation had already been accepted by my opponent. He'd accepted as to the time, and he accepted as to the place. And then it was offered to us to accept or not, and we accepted. If I were to insist on anything, it'd be to know why it is that we have the same moderators, the same sponsors, the same place, at the same time. The only thing that's different is the place. If I were to insist on anything, I'd want to know the answer to that. But it wasn't because of anything that I did. I accepted the invitation that was extended and already accepted by my opponent. And I just want to set the record straight on that.
Thank you, Holger. Please. All right, that's all the time we have for our questions. Thank the candidates for answering those. And we're going to go to our closing statements. Since Mr. Allen went first with his opening statement, Mr. Barrow gets to go first with the closing statement.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks again for participating all. I appreciate it. If it's anything that I'm proud of, it's that I have earned a reputation in Congress as somebody who can get things done because I can work with anybody, Republican or Democrat. That's why I've been endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, by No Labels, by the National Rifle Association. Those folks who know best, know their business best, have endorsed me. They haven't endorsed my opponent, even though he sought their endorsement, because what he said about my record just isn't true. And what they know about my record is that I vote with them. I vote in a bipartisan fashion. I work in a bipartisan fashion for two reasons. First, it's the right way to do things. Whether you like it or not, whether they're being nice to you or not, they got something to say, no matter which side of the aisle they're on. But more important, let's be pragmatic. It's the only way to get anything done. The way these two bodies have been tricked out today, nothing can get through the House unless it's extremely partisan. Nothing can get through the Senate unless it's extremely bipartisan. Nothing is going to get done unless folks can come together in a bipartisan fashion for common sense compromise that can be embraced on both sides of the building. I genuinely believe that's what this country needs. And I know that's what the vast majority of folks I represent say that they want. I'm going to close where I began. I'm proud to have helped bring thousands of jobs to this district. I'm proud of the fact that I'm as accessible and open to any and every citizen. And I'm proud of the fact that I'm leading by example to hold Congress accountable. If that's the kind of representation that you want, someone who will fight for you and not kowtow to either party up there, then I ask for your vote, and I'd be proud to have your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Mr. Allen?
Yes. I believe what we need in the United States Congress is somebody we can trust. Now, Mr. Barrow said he's never voted with anybody 84% of the time. Yet he sends out a letter 2 years ago saying that, in fact, he voted with President Obama 84% of the time. Now, Is that bipartisanship? I mean, he couldn't get anybody to vote against the health care law. Not a single Republican voted for the health care law, folks. You know why we don't have a bipartisan effort in the United States Congress? Because you can't trust people like John Barrow. And the reason you can't trust them and the reason they don't know how to lead is because leadership is all about trust. I've been working in the business 37 years. I've been involved in this community. I've rolled up my sleeves to build this community, folks. I know more about the needs of this community than John Barrow ever thought about. Now, if you want things to stay the same way they are in Washington, you vote for my opponent, John Barrow. But if you want to change the direction of this country, and you're as outraged as I am by the policies and this rhetoric that comes out of his mouth, then you vote for me. You've got a clear choice here, and I would appreciate your vote November 4th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rick Allen. Thank you, Mr. John Barrow, for accepting our invitation to come here. And thank everybody who came. I just want to make a statement for the fact also, okay? It was me personally who sent the letter of invitation to both camps simultaneously. And both camps responded with acceptance of the time, the place, on September 12th. I got confirmation from both camps. So that's all, just a statement of fact. Anyway, I do appreciate the fact that Columbia.
I'm so
Just
happy
let
you
me
brought
finish.
out
I'm
the
sorry.
truth of that, because his office
Okay.
sent out a press release saying we were not showing up for
Okay,
the debate.
I'm sorry.
so-
Just to finish this,
Yeah.
still very thankful for Columbia County
Yeah.
to allow this place to be used at the last minute, which really deprived many people from attending the event, because in the Islamic Center, if you are willing to visit, you will find it accommodates at least 800 people in a very nice, comfortable place. So that's the only thing I really feel regret about it. Other than that, I thank everybody who came, and we'll see you another time, inshallah.
And we have refreshments.
Thank you
You
very
want to
much.
stay for refreshments?